Reform groups in Texas. Number one is populists. So the populism group is a group where it's a nationwide movement of rural citizens. Sometimes these are informally referred to as country folks. These country folks, they gather together, they haven't benefited from modern lifestyles and the growth of industry, and really they just want the rights of workers to be protected. So I'm going to say populists wanted the government of the people to protect the rights of the interests of common workers. Farmers Alliance. The Farmers Alliance is a group of farmers, ranchers, farm laborers, and they spread throughout South Texas. They formed their own political party in 1892. This is known as the People's Party or the Populist Party. They demanded that the government set regulations on businesses. They want public ownership of railroads, telephones, telegraph lines, and then they also want national banks to be gotten rid of, elimination of national banks. They are calling for labor reform, a graduated income, so an income based on a tax based on what you make. So not everybody pays the same if they make different incomes. And then the direct election of senators. So this, because it's an amendment, we know that this is like all of the U.S. and not just Texas. So these populist groups were everywhere, but it especially affects Texas because we have so many rural or country workers. This populist group supports the creation of public warehouses so that farmers have a shared space to store goods that aren't selling. There were some elections that were won by the populist group at the state level, but really the group faded out because the Democratic Party starts to adopt their ideas and they start to implement the populists' ideas. So then there's no need for a populist political party. Next, we have progressives. This is legislative, that means lawmaking. So lawmaking reforms where they're trying to fix labor, child labor, education. They're trying to fix prisons, banks, and they're trying to look out for public safety. These reforms continue to protect Texans, and then most reforms ignored minorities. Next, we have the agrarian groups. Agrarian just means like farming or land, people that work on land. So the agrarian groups formed something called the Grange. The Grange was also known as patrons of husbandry. That's kind of hard to say. It was organized in 1873, which is the late 19th century. They offered something called co-ops, which is like when groups of people work together. They had this for business. They wanted people to have happier home lives. They wanted more social contracts, which means like people working together in society. And then they also wanted better education opportunities for the people in their club, in the Grange. We're turning pages. We have the labor unions. We have labor unions that form in the early 20th century. This is a small newspaper editor. He organized this group after the Populist Party failed, and they're going to be active in agriculture. And rule public policies. So they just want to influence small town policies. This word means country. So they're wanting small communities to be benefited by government policies. Women's rights happens in the early 1900s. We also know that this is the early 20th century. That's not that long ago, because in the late 20th century, Mrs. Edwards was born, and so was Coach Vaughn, and so was Coach Sanchez. We're all in the late 20th century. So the early 20th century, really not that long ago. Not all that long ago. Early 19th century, Texas women's suffrage groups were formed in major cities. Again, they're fighting for suffrage, which also means the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in the United States. The Texas Equal Suffrage Association supported and campaigned for the passage of the amendment. In August 19th, 1920, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in the United States. That's kind of important. I think you should write a flag next to it. However fancy you want your flag to be, it doesn't matter. This is really important in the history of the world, that women are given the right to vote in the United States. More specific to Texas, we have Jane McCollum. That's important. She was a member of something called the Petticoat Lobby. Petticoats are something that only women wear, so this was a women's group. The Petticoat Lobby worked for education, prison reform, prohibition, mother and children's health, and then they pushed for literacy. Literacy means the ability to read and write. There's more to that, but really it's like a basic education, like elementary school type of ability to read. They're also fighting for the elimination of child labor. She was appointed, they're talking about McCollum, she's appointed to Secretary of State under a guy named Dan Moody. Dan Moody's wife was a well-known philanthropist. That means that she gave large amounts of money to people, but especially education groups. And so there's a lot of Moody buildings around Texas universities, and those are named after Dan Moody's wife. And she was like, yeah, you can be governor, you can be in charge, but I'll write the checks. And so she was like really behind all of these reforms as far as money and providing money for these types of works of education, prison reforms, things like that. So Dan Moody is pretty cool. His wife is really cool. In 1929, we also have the League of United Latin American Citizens, and this is called LULAC, L-U-L-A-C. This was formed in Corpus Christi, and this supported the rights of Spanish-speaking people. So not only are they supporting women's rights, but they're also, whoops, you can't see that. They're supporting anything that's related to Spanish speakers. So we see this throughout Texas history, that there's people that support rights of Spanish speakers, but this is a whole group of people working together to fight for rights. This section on transportation, we could easily switch this to, say, early 19th century. And then we could say late 19th century. And then this one could be early 20th century. I do want you to write these because I want you to have an understanding of late and early centuries and how we use the term centuries. We don't say like 1900s. We use the school term for that, which is 20th century. And then we can pinpoint when it is by using early or late. Okay, transportation. At first, we had wagons, and then carriages and horses. And then by the late 19th century, also known as the late 1800s, we have wagons, carriages, horses, railroads, and steamboats. In the early 20th century, right here, early 1900s, we have railroads, shipping, cars, trucks. That's where we are right now. All of these things are things that we currently use. But we've added to it, and that's where we're going to go on the next page. So railroads increased the number of tracks, and then also they had to have regulations of prices and standards. In the late 20th century, remember we're writing that so that we understand late and early and the term century. Late 19th century, we have railroads, shipping, cars, trucks, and then we add air services. We carry people and goods through the air on airplanes. That's something new in the late 20th century. Then, because we have cars and trucks that are so popular, we create roads and highways. Those were built because of the increased number of cars and trucks. So here's like a little drawing of the progression of transportation. Environmental changes. The environment was further modified by the expansive building of roads as more Texans used automobiles. As a means of transportation. Following the 1900 hurricane, the city of Galveston built a seawall and increased the elevation of the city. That's a pretty cool story. We're going to look at that here in the next few days. They pumped sand, which would have been a really difficult thing to do around this year when that happened. Built in 1914, the Houston Ship Canal connects Houston and the Gulf of Mexico. Then we have Texans that planted trees and natural vegetation in the Texas Panhandle. This is to prevent erosion following the devastation and the effects of the Dust Bowl. This happens later in the next unit, but we're talking about modifications, so this is something we did to modify the environment. Irrigation systems facilitated the adaptation of the arid environment to this region. Arid means dry. That is a super dry area up there in the Texas Panhandle. Dams were built to provide hydroelectric power and control flooding. Reservoirs provided recreational areas where water once was. Then we have irrigation of the plains. They strained aquifers, some of which have dried up, yet crop yields have increased. drilling for oil in the Gulf of Mexico, along with the introduction of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking extraction methods, have resulted in more energy, economic growth, oil spills, oil contamination of beaches, Gulf and wildlife habitats, possible water contamination, and possible increase in seismic activity. That has to do with the Earth's plates. When you drill a certain way, it disrupts the Earth's plates, and then it can cause earthquakes, even here in Texas where we normally don't have earthquakes. All right, hang in there with me. We're almost there. Scientific discoveries and technology innovations, fossil fuels. First, we have the rotary drill bit. The rotary drill bit breaks through medium and hard rock at 10 times the speed. It is no surprise that once this was created, it changed oil drilling. We also have directional drilling. This is the practice of non-vertical wells. This allows drilling to occur in different types of landforms. Deep sea drilling, that's what you see off the coast sometimes. Drilling that can occur in the depths of the ocean. They can find new oil reserves. And then the industry has continued to flourish. It's continued to grow. Flourish means continued growth. Hydraulic fracking methods of oil drilling were highly pressurized. This is where highly pressurized liquid contamination that can cause contamination, including water and chemicals, and then they're used to break through rock and gain access to oil. This has probably caused contamination of groundwater and increased seismic activity, as we already discussed. The impact of the oil industry. In here, I'm going to have to do those political, economic, and social drawings. So let's do that. That one means political. It has to do with government. You remember this. We've been doing this most of the year. Government, that's where you draw the little government building. Economic, that has to do with money, how and where people get money. We draw little dollar signs in the square. And then the next one is social impact. That has to do with people. How does it affect people? Groups of people, individuals, whatever it is, that's social. Okay, let's look at the political, economic, and social impacts of the oil industry. The political impact is that the Texas Railroad Commission sets limits. Oh my goodness, we just learned that that was supported by Governor James Hogg. That was yesterday's warm-up, or maybe the day before. I don't know when you're watching this. Okay, so the Texas Railroad Commission sets limits and they control oil prices. They regulate the oil market and other markets as well. An economic impact is that you have the growth of cities and the rise of boom towns. That's like Desdemona. We saw a picture of that on the introductory slides. It had all these cars and then a guy on a horse. That was a boom town. It sprang up, everybody moved there, and then boom, the oil dries up and then everybody's gone. It's very quick and then it falls. This causes increased jobs in oil-related services, development of other parts of the state. That would be like the western portion of the state sees a lot of oil during this time. We have the growth of the automobile industry. That's for many, many reasons. One of the reasons that grew so much is because the production of automobiles became more practical and more sustainable because of a guy named Henry Ford. We can pause the video and talk about him if we want to. He revolutionized not just automobiles, but also a lot of industries where people were creating things. We can pause and talk about that if we need to. The social impact is that this improves the standard of living. More people have more money, which means that they can spend more money, which means that even more people get to have more money. It's a great thing. Okay, second to last page. We're almost there. Hang in there. All right, Howard Hughes Sr. Howard Hughes Sr. develops a new type of drill bit, and this is called the Rotary Drill. The Rotary Drill bit is a bit that makes it possible to drill through very hard rock to reach deep oil underground. This was in the early 20th century. The bit revolutionized the oil industry, which was one of the largest industries in Texas. Pretty sure this one is on your quiz. Can't remember, but I think it is. All right, World War I summary. World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918. The United States tries to not join in. They tried to keep their distance, but they finally joined in 1917. That was the year that was on your timeline, because that's the year that Texas became involved. It was first known as the Great War, the war to end all wars, because it was the only one. But then it actually ends up causing another world war. But at first it's the Great War. Most battles are going to take place in Europe and Southeast Asia. You can't see this map very well, but all of this stuff is water. That's the Mediterranean Sea. And so this battle is fought here and over here. That's why it's a world war, because so many people took sides and so many people got in on the action. Again, we can pause the video and talk about this, but this is really an example of an argument that could have been kept small, but everybody jumped in and they were like, I got your back. No, I got your back. No, I got your back. Kind of like a cafeteria fight when everybody ends up fighting instead of just two people. Okay. More than 8 million soldiers and sailors died, and more than 20 million were injured. The war was so bad that many people thought that no one would ever start another war. However, the result of World War I helped cause World War II. World War II broke out in 1939. World War II is the one that has Hitler in it. So when you think of world wars, you're probably thinking of World War II. It's kind of like the the Caesars in Rome. We think of those as one, but really there were two different Caesars, and they were very different. Okay, so impact of World War I on Texas. Political impact. Oh, we gotta draw our drawings again. Political impact. Approximately 200,000 Texans fought. A guy named Edward M. House was the closest advisor to my favorite president, Woodrow Wilson. And then 4 major military training camps were set up in Texas. Camp Bowie in Fort Worth, Camp Travis in San Antonio, Camp Logan in Houston, and Camp MacArthur in Waco. Next page. Oh, look at that. It's the last page. There you go. Gotta draw some more drawings here. We're gonna talk about the economic impact, which means money, and then we're also gonna talk about social, which is people. Okay, so an economic impact of World War I is that they raised money by, well, actually the government was selling Liberty bonds and the citizens were purchasing Liberty bonds. Women joined the workforce, and then some food was rationed. Rationed is when you're only allowed a certain amount and you can't have more than that. Social impact would be that approximately 500,000 women from Texas served as nurses. That's pretty cool. And then approximately 5,000 Texans died. That's very sad. Sacrifices on the home front included rationing. And many Texans volunteered for the Red Cross. There you go. Those are your notes for Unit 9, Modernizing Texas in an Age of Oil. I hope that you're having a great day. I hope that you could stay awake during this video. I think it's really cool stuff, and I hope that you do too. Have a great day.